The dense forest was alive with the whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of unseen creatures. The towering trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches weaving a canopy that filtered the sunlight into a mosaic of gold and green. Somewhere in the heart of this wilderness, a massive bull elk, his antlers like a crown of twisted branches, moved with a quiet grace. He was a gentle giant, his presence commanding yet serene, a creature of the forest who had survived countless winters and outlasted many predators. Not far from him, a small red fox darted through the underbrush. Her movements were quick and precise, her sharp eyes scanning the forest floor for signs of danger or opportunity. She was fearless, her boldness a stark contrast to the elk's calm demeanor. The two animals had crossed paths before, their lives intersecting in the vast expanse of the forest, but today felt different. The air was heavy with an unspoken tension, a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. The elk paused, his ears twitching as he caught a faint sound, a low, guttural growl that didn't belong to the forest. The fox froze, her body low to the ground, her ears swiveling toward the same direction. The growl came again, closer this time, and the forest seemed to shrink around them. The elk's muscles tensed, his nostrils flaring as he scanned the shadows. The fox, despite her size, stood her ground, her tail flicking nervously. The source of the sound emerged slowly, a shadow taking shape among the trees. A mountain lion, sleek and powerful, stepped into view. Its golden eyes locked onto the elk, its body coiled like a spring ready to unleash. The elk lowered his head, his antlers a formidable barrier, but the mountain lion was not deterred. It crept closer, its movements deliberate, its gaze never wavering. The fox, sensing the danger, let out a sharp bark, a warning that echoed through the trees. The mountain lion's attention shifted momentarily, its eyes flicking toward the small, defiant creature. The elk seized the moment, charging forward with a thunderous roar. The mountain lion leaped aside, its claws slashing through the air, but the elk's antlers grazed its side, sending it stumbling. The forest erupted into chaos. The fox darted between the trees, her barks echoing like a siren, drawing the mountain lion's attention away from the elk. The elk, now emboldened, pursued the predator, his hooves pounding the earth. The mountain lion, caught between the two, hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty for such a skilled hunter. As the tension reached its peak, a new sound pierced the air. A distant rumble, growing louder with each passing second. The animals froze, their instincts screaming of a danger far greater than any of them. The rumble became a roar, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. A wall of smoke and ash billowed through the trees, carried by a fierce wind. The forest was on fire. The mountain lion turned and fled, disappearing into the smoke. The elk and the fox stood side by side, their rivalry forgotten in the face of this new threat. The elk let out a mournful bellow, his eyes reflecting the flames that devoured his home. The fox, her courage unwavering, nudged his leg, urging him to move. Together they ran, their paths converging as they sought safety in the heart of the wilderness. The fire raged behind them, consuming everything in its path. The forest, once a sanctuary, was now a battlefield of smoke and ash. But as the elk and the fox disappeared into the distance, their bond forged in the crucible of survival, there was a glimmer of hope. The forest would heal, and life would find a way to endure. The story ended with the two animals standing on a ridge, looking out over the burning forest. The elk's head was held high, his antlers silhouetted against the fiery sky, while the fox sat at his side, her eyes gleaming with determination. The fire had taken much, but it had also revealed the strength of an unlikely alliance. A gentle giant and a fearless fox, united by the will to survive. The flames roared in the distance, their orange glow casting long flickering shadows across the ridge. The elk and the fox stood motionless, their breaths shallow and synchronized, as if the forest itself had taught them to breathe as one. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and the cries of fleeing animals, but the two remained still, bound by a silent understanding. The elk's massive chest rose and fell with each labored breath, his coat streaked with ash and sweat. His antlers, once a symbol of his dominance, now felt heavy, weighed down by the burden of loss. He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting the fox's. She was small, her fur singed in places, but her gaze was unwavering. There was no fear in her, only a fierce determination that seemed to say, "We are not finished yet." The fire continued its relentless advance, devouring everything in its path. The trees, ancient and unyielding, crackled and groaned as they fell, their trunks reduced to glowing embers. The forest, once teeming with life, was now a wasteland of smoke and despair. Yet, amidst the destruction, the elk and the fox found a strange kind of solace in each other's presence. They were survivors, bound by the same instinct to endure. As the night deepened, the fire's glow illuminated the sky, casting an eerie light over the landscape. The elk took a step forward, his hooves crunching against the charred earth. The fox followed, her movements quick and deliberate, her senses alert for any sign of danger. Together they navigated the treacherous terrain, their path lit by the fire's relentless blaze. They came across a narrow stream, its waters blackened by ash but still flowing. The elk lowered his head, drinking deeply, while the fox lapped at the water's edge. For a moment the world seemed to stand still, the fire's roar fading into the background. But the respite was brief. A loud crack echoed through the air, and a burning tree toppled into the stream, sending a spray of embers into the night. The elk reared back, his eyes wide with alarm, while the fox darted to safety. The fire was closing in, its heat unbearable, its hunger insatiable. The two animals exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They had to keep moving. They pressed on, their bodies weary but their spirits unbroken. The forest was no longer the sanctuary it once was, but it was still their home, and as long as they had each other, there was hope. Hours passed, and the fire's intensity began to wane. The sky, once choked with smoke, started to clear, revealing the first hints of dawn. The elk and the fox emerged from the charred remains of the forest, their bodies battered but alive. Before them stretched a vast meadow, untouched by the fire, its grasses swaying gently in the morning breeze. The elk stepped into the meadow, his hoofs sinking into the soft earth. The fox followed, her tail brushing against his leg. They stood together, their silhouettes framed by the rising sun, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace. The meadow was a new beginning, a place where life could start anew. The elk lowered his head, grazing on the fresh grass, while the fox curled up at his feet, her eyes closing as exhaustion finally claimed her. The fire had taken much, but it had also given them something rare and precious, a bond forged in the crucible of survival. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light over the meadow, the elk raised his head and let out a deep, resonant bellow. It was a sound of defiance, of resilience, a promise that life would endure. The fox stirred, her ears twitching at the sound, and for a moment it seemed as though the forest itself was listening. The story ended with the two animals resting in the meadow, their bodies bathed in the warmth of the sun. The fire had left scars, both on the land and on their souls, but it had also revealed the strength of an unlikely alliance. A gentle giant and a fearless fox, united by the will to survive, had found a way to carry on, even when the world around them burned. As the days turned into weeks, the meadow became their refuge. The elk, with his towering presence, grazed peacefully, his antlers now a symbol not just of strength but of resilience. The fox, ever watchful, patrolled the edges of the meadow, her sharp eyes scanning for threats. Though the fire had driven them here, the meadow offered a strange kind of solace. It was a place where life flourished, untouched by the devastation they had escaped. But the memory of the fire lingered. At night, when the air grew still and the stars blanketed the sky, the elk would often lift his head, his ears twitching at the faintest sounds. The fox, curled nearby, would sense his unease and rise to stand beside him. Together they would listen to the whispers of the night, the distant calls of owls and the rustling of small creatures in the grass. The forest was gone, but its echoes remained. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the fox caught a scent on the wind. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it stirred something deep within her. She stood abruptly, her nose twitching as she turned toward the edge of the meadow. The scent grew stronger, carried by the cool evening breeze. It was the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, of a place untouched by fire. The fox took a tentative step forward, then another, her body low to the ground. The elk followed, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. Together, they ventured beyond the meadow, into the unknown. The land beyond was scarred but not lifeless. Charred tree stumps stood like sentinels, their blackened forms stark against the twilight sky. Yet, amidst the devastation, there were signs of renewal. Tiny green shoots pushed through the ash-covered ground, and the air was filled with the hum of insects. The forest was healing, slowly but surely. The fox led the way, her movements quick and purposeful. She seemed to know where she was going, as if guided by an unseen force. The elk followed, his eyes scanning the landscape, his senses alert. They traveled for what felt like hours, the moon rising high above them, casting its silvery light over the land. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk scorched but still standing. Its branches, though bare, reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers. At the base of the tree was a small pool of water, its surface reflecting the moonlight. The fox approached the pool, her reflection rippling as she dipped her nose into the cool water. The elk joined her, drinking deeply. As they drank, a strange sound filled the air, a low, melodic hum that seemed to come from the tree itself. The elk and the fox looked up, their eyes drawn to the branches. There, perched on a charred limb, was a small bird. Its feathers were blackened, but its eyes shone with a fierce light. It sang a song of sorrow and hope, its voice carrying across the clearing. The elk and the fox stood transfixed, their hearts heavy with the weight of all they had lost. Yet, in the bird's song, they found a glimmer of something new. The forest was not gone. It was waiting to be reborn. The story ended with the elk and the fox resting beneath the oak tree, their bodies bathed in moonlight. The bird's song faded into the night, but its message lingered. The fire had taken much, but it had also revealed the resilience of life. Together, the gentle giant and the fearless fox would carry that resilience forward into a future filled with uncertainty and hope. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the forest began to stir, its whispers growing louder, its heart beating once more. The days that followed were a testament to the enduring spirit of the forest and its inhabitants. The elk and the fox, now inseparable, became symbols of renewal in the scarred landscape. They roamed the recovering forest, their presence a quiet reminder that even in the face of devastation, life finds a way to persist. The oak tree in the clearing became their anchor, a place they returned to often. The bird, though it never sang again in their presence, remained a silent guardian, its watchful eyes following their movements. The pool at the base of the tree became a gathering place for other animals, deer, rabbits, and even a wary badger, all drawn by the promise of water and the unspoken sense of community. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the charred branches, the fox noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the clearing, a patch of earth had been disturbed. She approached cautiously, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. The elk followed, his massive frame casting a shadow over the spot. There, nestled in the soil, was a cluster of tiny green shoots. They were fragile, their leaves still curled tightly, but they were unmistakable. New life emerging from the ashes. The fox let out a soft yip, her tail wagging as she circled the spot. The elk lowered his head, his breath stirring the delicate leaves. For a moment they stood together, their shared silence a tribute to the resilience of the land. As the weeks turned into months, the forest began to transform. The green shoots grew into saplings, their leaves reaching for the sun. Birds returned, their songs filling the air with melodies that had been absent for too long. The pool at the base of the oak tree became a hub of activity, a place where animals gathered to drink and rest, their interactions marked by a newfound sense of unity. The elk and the fox continued to roam, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They became guardians of the forest, their presence a calming influence on the other animals. The elk, with his towering antlers and gentle demeanor, inspired awe and respect. The fox, with her sharp instincts and fearless spirit, became a symbol of adaptability and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the elk and the fox returned to the oak tree. The clearing was alive with the sounds of life. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl. They stood together, their silhouettes framed by the fading light, and for a moment it seemed as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, from the branches of the oak tree, a single note rang out. It was soft but clear, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the forest's history and the promise of its future. The elk and the fox looked up, their eyes meeting the gaze of the blackened bird. It sat perched on a branch, its head tilted, as if listening to a song only it could hear. The note faded, but its echo lingered, a reminder that the forest was more than just trees and animals. It was a living, breathing entity, a tapestry of interconnected lives and stories. The elk and the fox, bound by their shared journey, were now a part of that tapestry, their story woven into the fabric of the land. The story ended with the elk and the fox resting beneath the oak tree, their bodies bathed in the soft light of the moon. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of renewal, a symphony of life that spoke of resilience and hope. The fire had left its mark, but it had also revealed the strength of the bonds that held the forest together. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, the elk let out a deep, resonant bellow, a sound that carried across the clearing and into the heart of the forest. The fox, curled at his feet, let out a soft yip in response. Together, they stood as guardians of a new beginning, their presence a testament to the enduring spirit of the wild. The forest, scarred but unbroken, whispered its gratitude, its voice carried on the wind. And in that moment, the elk and the fox knew that they were not just survivors, they were the heartbeat of a land that refused to be silenced.